All right, so last class when we wrapped up, we stopped at talking about cultural practices in IPM management. So we're going to continue tonight by speaking about biological controls. Let me just move this out of the way. Biological control and so on. So I hope everybody had a good day and is going to be patient with me tonight because we may go a bit over 8 p.m., not too far, but a bit because each session, it's a four-part session, and each session has different components that I would cover. But because we started late because of the introduction last evening, I had a few slides that I did not cover and would love to do that before I start soil health, right? So biological control. This is where you use parasitic insects or mites to deal with a problem that we may have. So, not quite sure I covered this last class, did I? Hold on, let me just see what's next. So in biological control, when we had the pink mealybug, ladybug beetles were imported so that they can feed on the pink mealybug. There's also things like parasitic wasps that can feed on certain insects that would be of a nuisance to your crop. So simple things like these. But for how I deal with mealybug, and I think I said this before, so it's something like I presented, I passed this session, but I'll continue. I usually use dishwashing liquid with some water, and because this is how the mealybug looks, the dishwashing liquid normally dries them out and they just fall off. So that's all I normally use. But we don't have that great effect of pink mealybug like we had about 10, 15 years ago, right? Chemical control. Now, because we are talking about IPM management, right, integrated pest management and integrated disease management, oftentimes folks think that we cannot use chemical. Yes, we can, but we are going to think about using chemical as a last resort. So because you're going to use chemical as a last resort, you can use the sticky traps, you can do intercropping, you can do companion planting, you can use, well, I mentioned sticky traps before. So all these things you can use before you think about moving to chemical control. Now, if you're going to use chemical control, you start by using biopesticides, right? And when we talk about biopesticides, those are the ones that are in the green hazard or symbol, right? When you look at the pesticide label, they are basically in the category of being green in terms of they're slightly hazardous. So that would be the first one I would think about using. So we are talking about things like neem oil, neem X, and so on, right? There are different horticulture oil that you can use. There are even some sprays that are made from hot peppers that are very efficient, or you can make your own biopesticides, right? If you have such knowledge. And oftentimes they are very easy, right? But if you're going to purchase, you're going to start with using things like biopesticide, which is slightly hazard. Then you can move up to the moderately have hazard if the need be. But if you don't have to, you shouldn't, right? But with intercropping and companion planting and sticky traps, you may not ever need to use harsh chemicals that are moderately hazard or highly hazardous or extremely hazardous. I do not use any chemical in those categories. I would quickly use slightly hazardous chemicals that are things like neem oil, neem X, and so on, right? And neem has now a line of different chemicals that you can buy. Normally, you used to just have neem oil, and you would take your neem oil and you add it in with your dishwashing liquid and so on. Now, you can find different biopesticide that has neem as the active ingredient at various places. You can find them at Cobano. He has a nice one. You can find them at Nash in Leyu, and also at Agriculture Input Warehouse, right? So these are some simple home remedies that you can do. You can make your remedies using things like garlic, neem extract, and you can have a chance to, when you get the PowerPoint, you can go through and see the steps and how you go about making such these things that you can use in your crops, right? You can use red peppers, which is hot peppers, and these are very good when you're going to control things like leaf hoppers and aphids and spider mites, especially in things like tomatoes. Then you have your marigold, as everyone know, and these are very good in basically dealing with fungal diseases. So those diseases that would be from moisture, sometime on your cucumber, you will see these white spots. That is after harvesting, because most fungal disease tend to show up after harvesting, things like anthracnose. So anthracnose in your cucumber, anthracnose in your tomatoes, you can use marigold. And here you have the mixture of how you can go about mixing it. And as I said, when you get the PowerPoint, you have access to all these that you can utilize. Baking soda spray for powdery mildew. That has worked wonders for me. So for example, when I have things like butternut squash plant or watermelon and they end up having powdery mildew, this is what I normally use: a tablespoon of baking soda, some oil. I don't normally use a vegetable oil. What I just basically do is add the neem oil, right? So I use baking soda, neem oil, dishwashing liquid, and some water. I mix it and I spray my plants, and within a week or two, I start seeing changes, right? You can also use wood ash, especially if you have things like mites, fungal diseases, viral diseases. If you have slugs, once you have wood ash in the field, slugs tend to not like to be around wood ash, because when they crawl over it, the sharp particles in the ash tend to cut the underneath. So they tend to stay away from areas where they have wood ash. And not only that wood ash can be used for things like slugs and snail and nematodes in your soil, because sometimes you have nematodes and you're wondering what to use. You can utilize some wood ash and just mix it into the soil. But also wood ash is high in potassium, which will boost your flowering in your plants, especially things like tomatoes, eggplants, sweet peppers, and so on. So you will have a high yield. So wood ash is very good. Also, you can use wood ash when you have, which we'll talk about a bit later on down, when you're dealing with the pH of your soil. Let's say your soil is more alkaline than acidic. If you want to balance out that pH, you can add wood ash, right? If it's acidic, you would have to add lime to raise the pH. So in order to lower the pH, you use wood ash. To raise the pH, you add limestone, right? So this was just a question, problem solution, and I missed out the question, but this is the answer. Some integrated pest management process. The first thing, you will do your inspection. You have your plants growing, you'll do inspection, you can do identification, and oftentimes I have individual asking me what they can use to identify certain pests if they don't have a book or they're not aware of the pests. There's so much apps online now that can assist you. So one of them that I have my students use is called pest identification. So you basically point it over the pest and it can identify what is there. Another app that I use with my students are Picture This, especially if they're unaware of an ornamental plant and they want the correct name along with the scientific name. You can use Picture This and it will give you all the information in terms of growing condition, disease that may be affecting the plant, and so on. Companion planting. We're still in the IPM topic. So companion planting, very, 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 very beneficial. Not only does companion planting deter pests, right? In terms of, if you have an area of land and you put in things like tomatoes, as I said before, you can put marigold, you can put garlic and so on to help to deter pests, things like basil, right? But they also, based on the plant that you add there, or the plant that you use as a companion, the herbs, I should say, that you use as a companion plant, once it's flowering, it can also attract beneficial insect. And when it attracts beneficial insect, it will assist with pollination, and so you will have a high yield. Also, some companion plants could be act as a shade for example, you have bush bean plant and you have corn planted right next to it. The companion there is that the bush bean is providing nitrogen for the corn, while the corn, because it's taller than the bush bean, it will provide shade for the bush beans, right? Also, some act of support. We'll go back to the corn. If you have corn and you are planting things like string beans or cucumber or butternut squash, these can actually run up under the corn as a means of support, so they wouldn't be running on the ground, right? So some plants improve plant health, and we can go back to talk about legumes because of the nitrogen fixing bacteria, so that add nutrients to the soil. So improve health is one of the benefits of companion planting. Also improve soil fertility. And I have here some crops like beans, peas, legumes, obviously would add nitrogen to the soil, right? Weed suppression. So when you have crops like sweet potato, right, they spread over the ground, so it will help to suppress weed. And they also help to maximize land. And the funny thing is, growing up, with my grandparents, I would see when they set up an area with crops, it would be something like sweet potato, corn, pigeon peas, and cassava. And it's years after I would realize they had the science behind it because they understand. But you know, my grandfather would say to me that the sweet potato was one of his main crop, and also pigeon peas. But the corn was basically planted to deter rats from damaging the sweet potato, right? Because the corn was basically sold local and maybe some for home use, but the sweet potato was sold to traffickers and places like Eastern Caribbean agencies and those and so on. So he needed his sweet potato, so the corn was put in to deter rats from the sweet potato. Then, so you know, the corn will be harvesting first, then the sweet potato, depending on the variety, could be in 3 months, 4 months, right? Then he had the pigeon peas, right? So the pigeon peas were there, and by the time you finish harvesting the sweet potato, the pigeon peas would remain there. Now the vine from the pigeon peas would stay in the field to rot and add back organic matter to the soil, right? Then you have the pigeon peas. I don't know how much people realize in a field of pigeon peas, because of the allelopathic effect, hardly any sort of weed grow under that area, right? So at the same time, it helps with weed suppression. Not only that, but it also adds back nitrogen to the soil because of a nitrogen fixing bacteria. Whereas when you have your cassava there growing, and you don't have to add any sort of fertilizer at that time, and it will be getting nutrients from the pigeon peas. By the time you harvest cassava for farine production, you have some nice, large, big cassava. And the cycle will continue. So while one crop is coming out, one crop is feeding back the soil, and so he would continue his cycle over and over, right? So we are going to talk about small space, large production. So we finished with IPM. We're going to talk about small space, large production. So you may have a backyard that is strictly concrete jungle, or you may have a backyard that has rocky soil, so you're not able to plant as you would love to. But don't be deterred, because there are things now that you can use and to actually engage in crop production. So you have to think not only planting on the ground, but you have to think vertical production, right? So you know, there are now aquaponics, there are aeroponics, there are different technologies now in agriculture that you can get involved in food production. So this one is Mr. Stacky. So in Mr. Stacky, in the first picture here, I think it's 600 holes. So here you have kale. You can grow kale, you can grow celery, whatever the case that you want to grow, you can grow, because you can grow herbs, you can grow things like from solanaceous families such as bell peppers, tomatoes, and so on. So this is just an example of Mr. Stacky. And I have contacts if anyone is interested in doing something like this, right? So you can, it would be coming out of Trinidad. So if you need the contacts, you will let me know and I would share that information with you. But you have to think small space, large production, right? Here again, we have small space, large production. In the first one, this is a flatbed hydroponic system. In the second one, these are just recycling. Instead of burning these oil containers, they are recycled because you have to reduce the amount of pops in the environment. And that's a discussion for another time, right? So here you have the oil containers, which is basically cut. A simple irrigation system is run to it, and you're going to, in that small, you're going to be able to grow tomatoes for your home or for sale. Here in the second picture, the third picture, my bad, you have grow bags, and these are 3-pound grow bags, and you can find these on Amazon. Just go on Amazon and look for grow bags. They have different types. They have the plastic, they have the breathable fabrics, whichever your budget can, your pocket can bring, then you can actually invest. But the grow bags grow your crop very well. And here you have a small area like this, and you can harvest large amount of sweet peppers. Integrated livestock and crop. And that is something that we have to take seriously because we have been harvesting fish from the ocean for a while, and we know that this resources being depleted over and over a period of time, especially with global warming and the sea actually warming up due to climate change. They have been changed in the biodiversity system and the quantities that you would find in the ocean. So you have to think about integrating livestock with crops. So when we talk about that, we can get involved in aquaponics. So in the first picture here, this was a project at UE years ago when I was a student there. In the bottom, you have tilapias. On top, you have chicken. So now the droppings from the chicken would drop in the water and create algae, and the fish would eat the algae. Any extra amount of feed would also fall into the water and create algae, and the fish would actually eat the algae. And then the water from that, my God, the water from this would then go and water vegetables that are growing, right? So one of the advantages of integrated farming is very obvious. As far as fish production is concerned, it serves a major purpose in providing cheap feedstuff and organic manure for fish pond. We have to find ways and means of providing protein source for ourselves, right? Not only from the ocean, but you can actually do it in your backyard. Protein sources, simple things as tilapia or poultry production and so on, right? So we have to find ways and means of providing poultry protein source for ourselves. And with this, you would reduce the amount of, well, you would not be using any sort of chemical fertilizer because the droppings and the water from the fish is what is going to use to fertilize your crop to basically grow them, right? The principal advantage of integration is demonstrated as a total farm productivity and sustainable agriculture. So you basically reduce the risk of raising a single product or growing a single product. So you will not only be growing vegetables alone, but you will also be rearing animal, be it livestock such as poultry or rabbits or sheep and goat production. So it would not be integrating your livestock and crop would not be having one crop, crop alone, but a single product alone, but you would have many products, right? So you'll have if you're doing fish and vegetables, so you have your vegetable supply and a protein supply. If you're doing chickens, if you're doing rabbit, you'll have your protein supply and your vegetables, right? If you're into tilapia or aquaponics production, you also increase water infiltration, right? In terms of the type of water that goes to your crop, right? You also there's a resistance to soil erosion because you're not planting in the soil, so you're not disturbing the soil to lend way for soil erosion. You also reduce your fertilizer cost from nutrient cycling, and nutrient cycling is basically utilizing the nutrients or the water from the fish into growing your crops. So it's a whole cycle. You reduce weeding because in aquaponics production, there is no weeding, right? You improve soil fertility due to the return of things like dung and urine to the soil. So if you're rearing things like small ruminant, which is sheep and goat, or rabbit, and you know rabbit urine is a big thing on the market now. You can buy the urine and actually use it in your crop production. So you basically improve soil fertility because all these wastes are being recycled, added back to the soil, and these organic matter are very good for your soil, because in soil health we'll talk about organic matter, or organic matter basically feeds the soil, whereas commercial fertilizer feeds only the plant. And you want to feed the soil so the soil could have a healthy biodiversity or microorganisms, so you could continue to have high yield, right? Value addition to the tree crop. The value addition to the tree crop is basically the animal dung that is added so that the tree crop could provide a good yield, right? So high tunnel production, very popular in St. Vincent now. Some people call them greenhouses, hop houses, polytunnels, right? So high tunnel or polyethylene covered metal structure, or sometimes called hoop houses, they cover high value crops. So in greenhouses or polytunnels, whatever you know the name as, tropical greenhouses, you put high value crops. So you will not put things like corn in your greenhouse or those sort of things, but you will put things like crops that need protecting from the environment. So you put things like cucumbers, tomato, bell peppers, and so on, what certain type of variety of watermelon and so on, so that you can have protection from the environment, so they would not be affected by rain and harsh weather conditions and so on, right? So sorry. So in the first picture, you have cucumber production, and this was at the college, not last year, but the year before. Here is tomato production that was done earlier this year. Right, this one was last year and this one is this year. And this is just a short video just to show you some of the students. Just do it. Don't let your head stop your heart from moving. If there's someone you want to talk to, who knows who we'd be if we just live in love. We all just need to live in love. So earlier on, we talk about biosecurity measures, and biosecurity measures is very important. And I talk about individuals entering your farm and so on. But one of the other aspect of biosecurity measure is having a footbath at the entrance of your farm, and your farm should only have one entrance, so that you wouldn't have people coming from different direction and not knowing that they're entering your farm, right? So you should have one entrance and a footbath at the beginning of your entrance. Individuals now can basically wash their boots or step into it just in the event that they're carrying any sort of pest on their shoes. It would be in that footbath. So the footbath will have in a disinfectant that would sanitize or disinfect your shoes before they enter further on your farm, so they would not bring any sort of disease onto your farm. So biosecurity measure provide a footbath at the entrance of the farm into the greenhouses, right? You should also limit non-essential traffic on the farm. Keep any sort of record of anyone who visits your farm. Have only one entrance and exit. Keep other animals off your farms, right? For example, if you have a poultry unit, you have to keep things like pigeons and so out, because you have to think about things like avian influenza, and you don't want your chickens to be wiped out by any diseases. I know of, I think, turkey pox. I have a past student who works in the ministry, and she posted some information the other day about turkey pox and those sort of things. And you don't want someone who have turkey pox on their farm entering your farm, that way you have your poultry and bringing that disease. So you have to limit people on your farm. And I'll tell you this, when it comes to agriculture production these days, everybody like to touch, everybody like to see, right? You have to know what you are going to allow, because if you're doing this for additional income, and then someone visit your farm, they bring on a disease and your entire crop is wiped out, then that's a major loss for you, right? So you have to limit the amount of people that are coming onto your farm. So these pictures below here, just some pictures at the college. The bottom one, I indicate my students no eating or drinking in that area. I remind them that it's a workplace and you have to have a workplace safety, no clowning around and so on. Visitors, no entry unless you are basically given permission to enter. So no pits, no slippers, no shoes that you can fall down inside and blame me or anyone else, right? You also have to disinfect your feet, your shoes before entering. So no shorts, you must have on a whole shoes and so on, right? So I have a small activity area that asks to outline the 5 sustainable agriculture practice or discuss the 5 components of IPM. So on the next slide, I basically answer the questions. Sustainable agriculture practices. Let me just mute this person. Not quite sure. Let me mute this up. All right. So some sustainable agriculture practice is rotating crops to embrace biodiversity, establishing a cover crop, reducing or eliminating tillage. So we're talking about no-till farming, applying integrated pest management or integrated disease management, integrating livestock and crop, and adopting agroforestry practices. Right? And the 5 components of IPM, we talk about identifying. First thing you have to basically monitor for your pest production, right? Develop a sound pest management goal, implement your IPM program, record it and evaluate your results, and always keep trying to identify these pests and understand their life cycle, right? Because if you're able to understand their life cycle, you'll know the ideal time to spray, right? So discuss how small producers and family farm contribute to sustainable development. I just have some small 2 short videos here showcasing the ladies from the Garden. Michelle, help me, I forget the name of your group. Garden group from different various churches, from Glen Baptist Church, Kingston Baptist Church, Nazarene, New Testament. I think that is it, right? So it's just a short video with them.
Let's do this. That is why God says, I will bless the work of your hands. Meaning, before I start praying for God to bless me, I need to find something to do with my hands.
Yes.
So if I don't have something that my hands are doing, God has nothing to bless, because he won't bless a work that doesn't exist. You put something, then he touches it, it becomes.
Right, that is just 2 videos from that group. They were using the wood chipper and Saturday morning activities at the college.
Let's do this.
Trying to move to the next slide. Right. Oh, now we've gone too far. Just give me a second. Let me get back to where I'm supposed to be. Right. So I said discuss how small producers and family farm contribute to sustainable development. So they produce food for families, and excess can be sold to the communities and local market. And if you have excess, you can actually sell to regional market. It supply a source of employment for families and villagers. It provides a safety net to generation of families, including members of their community. You also protect the natural environment and biodiversity. You use organic products and practices and native species, and we talk about native species, which I will sometimes mention as land race in their method of farming. They practice agriculture diversification and mixed method of farming, so they are not focused on monocropping, right? So you can create a nice diversity with different types of plants, right? They source indigenous knowledge based on, you know, what their foreparents and so did, right? So they source indigenous knowledge and practices that were passed on over the generation. They preserve tradition and local culture. They own their labor, farming business, and it's free to make their own business. And they stabilize rural communities and stimulate economic activities within those villages, right? This is just a table I add. If you hear me talking about solanaceous family, we're talking about the nightshade family, so that include things like tomatoes, eggplant, bell peppers. If you hear me talk about the brassica family, we're talking about cabbage and radish and kale and so on. Cucurbit family, you're talking about watermelon, butternut squash, cucumber, and so on. Fabaceae family would be things like beans and so on. So this was put here so you could understand when I talk about different families, what I'm actually referring to, right? And at the end, you have a nice few questions that you can actually work on so that you can understand sustainable agriculture a bit more. All right, and that's a wrap on session 1. So let me just share session. So session 2 focuses on soil health. Just give me a second. All right, so session 2 focus on soil health, and soil health is very important. So on the topics we're going to cover tonight on the soil health, I'm trying my best to speak as slow as possible because my sister said I speak too fast, but can't help it. That is just the way I speak, right? So tonight, the topics we're going to cover is the role of soil fertility in sustainable agriculture, some soil conservation methods, things like cover crop, no-till farming, organic mulches, inorganic mulches, water harvesting and its benefit, how to set up a simple irrigation system, the components, and we are just going to list some pre-harvest factors so that next session we will talk about some pre-harvest factors that would affect fruits and vegetable quality, and we'll get into post-harvest in the third session, and in the last session we'll cover value addition or product development, right? So soil health. What is soil health? Soil health is defined as the capacity of the soil to function as a vital living ecosystem to sustain plants, right? So plants, animal, and human, right? How you can determine whether your soil is healthy, not only by looking at the color, but I said before, once you find at least 5 earthworms, you are on to a healthy soil. If you find more, perfecto, right? So 5 or more earthworms, that would be indicating that your soil is healthy, right? So 5 soil health principles, right? So you use plant diversity to increase diversity in the soil because you know different types of plant can add nutrients to the soil. You manage your soil more by disturbing them less. So you try to practice things like no-till farming, or if you set up your area where you are going to farm, you can set up things like bed, cover them with agri-fabric or ground cover, punch boreholes or create holes, plant there, and then you would just have to till that hole every time you're going to install a crop, establish a crop, rather than till that area over and over. Oftentimes when people are tilling area, they think that the finer you tilt it is best. It's not best because you are breaking up all the aggregates, and when you break up the aggregates, you reduce the pore space. And you have to remember that a plant is a living breathing organism, so it depends on things like gas exchange. And when that area is compacted, because one, you overtill that area, so it becomes so fine that it's easily compacted, right? Water wet it, it's compact. You walk in, it is compact. You don't want your soil to be extremely compact. So if you have soil like that, that is extremely compact, right? What you do to amend that soil, so things like clay soil and those other things, what you do, you don't add sand. Oftentimes people think if you add sand to clay soil, you are amending the soil. No, you will get concrete. So what you add is some organic matter. Once you add organic matter, it will start to help the soil to develop structure, and you will have aggregation. So you'll have free movement of water to the soil and free movement of air, right? So another 5 soil health principles to keep plants growing throughout the year so they can basically feed the soil. So if you keep the soil nice and covered, it can actually protect the soil from things like wind erosion, water erosion, and so on, right? So keep the soil covered as much as possible, integrate livestock to recycle nutrients and increase plant diversity, right? A healthy soil has good water infiltration and retention. So not only will water will percolate or infiltrate through the soil, but it will help to retain water. And sometimes you have to add your organic matter so it can help to retain that water, right? So the biological activity within the soil increases soil fertility and helps to build good soil structure. These things reduce the need for expensive input, and it increases plant resilience to things like droughts and pests and intense rain. So healthy soil is a start, right? So it's not about just putting in your crops and focusing on the crops and giving it fertilizer, but you must start with a healthy soil. So it goes back, a healthy foundation, a solid foundation, you will get good end results, right? The role of agroforestry in soil health, we talked about a bit about that last time. So because agroforestry includes things such as trees, right? So now with the trees, obviously when the trees are on the land, right, it has a deep root system. So instead of having water running off, right, as in the case of a land that has no trees planted there, growing there, the water will run off. But because it has large trees, the water will now percolate through the soil rather than run off, right? So if there's no trees and the water run off, you know you have erosion. The good topsoil is being washed away, right? So agroforestry system can basically complement other practices like improve healthy soil health, like cover crops, no-till, nutrient management. Even if you have trees such as gloricida, or what you know them as shade bush or shade tree that you give to your animal, you know that is a legume crop, so it'll be adding back nitrogen to the soil, right? Trees on your land also creates a nice microclimate to keep that area cool, so you will have less water evaporating from the soil. So as I mentioned before, the individuals who purchase land or get land to start farming and remove the trees, that's like a no-no. Keep your trees for one, and microclimate, two, moisture in the soil, because once you have a microclimate, you evaporate, the intensity of the sun would be decreased, so you will have moisture in that area, right? Rather than it's always being dried and you have to find source of water to take to that area, right? Also, as I said, you would not have water erosion because the water will percolate through the soil, right? So agroforestry is not only a way to create and maintain healthy soil, but it basically supports health and more within the soil. Not only that, other things like a windbreak, it's a form of windbreak. Let's say you have plants that has a lot of blossom. Now, with high intensity of wind blowing, one, it can knock off the blossom, and when the blossom knock off, it reduces the yield. What the wind keep blowing through your crops, it will have high evaporation, so you will always have to be able to add water to keep that to that plant, because it keeps the water keep evaporating. So having trees around as a windbreak is perfect. As I said, it creates a microclimate, it reduces wind speed, and with reduction in wind speed, it will reduce evaporation and maintain your blossoms on the plant rather than they being blown off by wind. So soil fertility and soil health. Fertile soil can produce healthy food with all the necessary nutrients for a healthy person. Soil fertility is the ability to sustain plant growth by providing essential nutrients for favorable chemical and physical, also biological characteristic as a habitat for plant growth. Include things such as the macronutrients such as NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, Also micronutrients such as boron, chlorine, copper, iron, and so on. And oftentimes we think that these things are not important. Sometimes when you take up a bottle of liquid fertilizer, you would see macro and micronutrients listed on it. And when you look at the micronutrients, you would see things like boron, copper, and so on. And these things are needed by plant. Macronutrient is needed in a large amount, but sometimes if a plant don't have a simpler micronutrient, it can stunt the plant growth, right? So soil fertility is a capacity or the ability of the soil to supply plant nutrients to the crop in available in a balanced form. 18 essential nutrients is needed, things such as carbon, right? Iron, boron, manganese, zinc, copper, sulfur, oxygen, hydrogen, sodium, and all these things are needed by plants, right? One of the problems that we have here, individuals just plant. They do not do a soil test. They have no knowledge of what the soil nutrient content may be, and they just go ahead and plant, right? And then they start adding fertilizer. So in St. Vincent, we don't focus so much on fertilizer use efficiency. We just add fertilizer because, just adding fertilizer sake. They don't do a soil test, know what is deficient, so you would only add what is deficient. Not much people do a soil pH test as well, right? So they just basically start farming, right? So before we get into soil tests and so on, I just want to show you an example of what soil degradation looks like. I, for one, never thought that I would have experienced that in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, knowing that we have nice volcanic soil. But this goes back to when soil is basically abused by excessive use of chemicals and so on, and it kills off the microorganism in the soil. So it eventually becomes like a dust bowl. There is no sort of soil aggregation. The structure of the soil has basically been destroyed and so on, right? When I look at where I'm coming from, I know I'm blessed and so I want to pause. So you see that dust, that is what happened when we were tilling. And that's because there is no soil structure. When we dig into that soil, we could not find any sort of earthworm or anything like that. But if you have soil like this, all hope is not lost, right? In the first picture, you would look here and you would see like the place has been weeded. No, it wasn't weeded, it was just there bare for a long time. And look at the soil color. When we get done talking about soil color, you would look at the soil and see it has a lot of calcium deposit. Is clear, it's pale, so it's deficiency in organic matter and nutrients and so on, right? I know I'm blessed, and I close my eyes and smile. Sometimes I feel like the richest man in Babylon, and I've done my best. So next slide. So from that soil, what we did was add organic matter like sheep and goat dung, rabbit dung, compost were added, and you can see from the soil before and now, you can actually see that the soil color has basically changed. It's getting darker, and soil aggregation is occurring. Water is basically filtrating through the soil. Now in the previous picture, there was a problem with water filtrating through. So after what we did, as I said, we add organic matter.
Good night. You were the one with the NPK, and so you were with that one. NPK. It was a different photo. It wasn't this one.
This?
It was about the NPK fertilizer and how they need nutrients and all that.
Here?
I think you
yes,
passed
we were there. We were there.
Wow, that's how good we're back.
This one. We passed this one already. You were with the one with the NPK, and you were saying that they need.
You were with the one with the watermelon. You were with the watermelon plant, and you was talking about what you were giving.
Exactly.
Yes.
All right. So here, as I said, this is here, stop. we added organic matter. And the organic matter that we added is sheep and goat dung from small ruminants, rabbit dung, and we added compost, right? Here you can see there's already a change in the color of the soil, right? So once you add these things, you must also add water so it can actually start the moisture. Microorganisms love moisture because the place must be conducive for them to live, not harsh and dry, but nice moisture, and they will actually start growing. And you will start seeing changes, soil aggregation, and so on. So from before it's at here, right now, it's not where I would like it to be, but I'll have to continuously work on it to get it where I would like it to basically be. So as I said before, if you want to see if your soil is healthy, you're going to dig into the soil 12 inches deep, which is the length of a ruler, and you would see if you have 5 or more earthworms, and that would indicate that your soil is healthy. If you do this activity and you have less than 5 earthworm, it would be best that you add organic manure. So you'll get some cattle dung, some sheep dung, some goat dung, and you add it to the soil, rabbit dung, and you add some you add some water, and you leave it over a period of time. You do your planting and whatever the case may be, and you will actually see changes as it go along. So you saw the video before where it was like a dust bowl in terms of when you till in, the structure of the soil has basically been lost because of excessive use of fertilizer and chemicals and so on. And that is a perfect example why you should not focus on using a lot of chemicals, because that is how your soil would be over a period of time, right? So it went from that, and this is what we had after a period of time. This took us, let me see, I started in February. This was by April, May. Success don't come overnight. No make them know substance over hype. Nobody will love light, that's alright. Sit down on the post and the tweet all night. See them on social media type. While I said them they a studio advice. Oh, me never put them up on no flight. And me never see them on them. Fire on fire, what normally kicks.
Hi, Miss Edwards.
Hi.
We have quite a bit of some fabulous music in the background.
Oh yes, with the video.
Oh, okay.
You're not seeing the video?
Oh yeah, yes.
Right. Right. So even though, as I said before, if you are encounter soil like these, don't give up. Don't see it as something to be deterred. You just need to work a bit harder, add your organic matter, and you're good to go. Those 2 videos that I just showed you there, no sort of fertilizer were used. It was just organic matter to amend the soil. I focus on feeding the soil, and the soil will basically give you a healthy yield. So don't think about adding fertilizer in terms of things like urea, blue corn, whatever the fertilizer, commercial fertilizer there is. You try to focus on building back the soil, amending the soil. What I use as fertilizer or biostimulants to my plants are things like Bountiful Harvest. I use Agassi, which is seaweed base. I use cytokine. Those are what I basically use on my plants, right? So soil color, look at it, you can see the difference, right? So soil color is due to 3 main pigmentation in the soil. Black is from organic matter, so the darker your soil is the richer it is. And once you have nice dark soil, you will be good to go. So dark soil is from organic matter. Red soil is from a high percentage of iron or aluminum oxide, and white is from silicates or clay or salt, right? So calcium deposits and those sort of things. So when you're farming, what you want is nice dark brown soil, right? And in order to get that, you have to add organic matter, because pale brown or yellow soil often indicate there's low nutrients, low organic matter, and it's indication of poor fertility, right? And if it's poor fertility, they also would have poor structure. So you will be wetting that plant, and there would be that soil, and it would only be wet on top. There would be no percolation of water through the soil, right? Also, especially in these times or any other time, one of the things that you must do is add mulch. Mulch helps to suppress your weed, and it also helps to conserve moisture. Because remember, in sustainable agriculture, you're trying to use less amount of everything, but also get a high yield, right? Nutrient deficiency. So nutrition deficiency occur when a plant lacks an essential nutrient that is required for it to grow, right? Without sufficient essential nutrients, plant will not grow well, right? They will show various symptoms that will express deficiency, right? And because I close it. In this picture, you would see deficiency in things such as N, P, and K, right? Nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, right? So the deficiency in nitrogen can be yellow leaves, right? Deficiency in phosphorus can sometimes look like it have slightly purple or brown leaf. In the vein can look slightly purple, right? Deficiency in potassium, it looks like it's rusting, right? The end of the leaf is rusting, it's slightly yellow and rusting. And you can see like the vein is being more indent in terms of more visual, and then it's pale along the leaf blade and so on, right? So over a period of time, you will understand or get to understand what deficiency your crop is in. And you may be growing a crop. One of the most important things that you must do is do a soil test to know your nutrition level, also a pH test, because later on we'll talk about the pH test will determine whether the nutrient is available to the plant, right? So we have blossom end rot. Blossom end rot is insufficient amount of calcium in the tissue of the tomato. Now, it can indicate that in the soil, there's insufficient amount of calcium. Also, this occurs during dry season when the water balance in the soil is not sufficient to actually enable the calcium to travel up through via the root towards the plant, right? So one of the things when you're growing solanaceous crop, you must keep the soil moist at times, right? Don't allow drying out to occur, because you can have things like cracking and so on. But if you have blossom end rot, you can use things like eggshell. And I think I explained to you how I go about using my eggshell. I'll collect them, I'll wash them, sanitize them, dry them in the oven, take them out, run them through my blender, so it will be grind to powder, add some white vinegar to it, and then add some water and use it on my plants, right? The white vinegar would help it to actually break down faster, so it can be able to be absorbed by the plant, right? The second picture is a deficiency in boron, right? Boron deficiency tend to have your tomato looking like it's distorted. I don't want to use the word cat face, but it's looking distorted, damaged. It's looking like it's bruised, like it's been rubbing against something. But this is just a deficiency in boron, right? So boron deficiency affects the vegetative and the reproductive growth, right? Inhibiting cell expansion, right? So if you have a boron deficiency, now, even before we talk about having a boron deficiency, if we add organic matter to the soil, organic matter such as animal dung, these things have micronutrients, and boron is a micronutrient. So when we add these things to the soil, we would not encounter things like these, right? But if you encounter things like these, you would add boric acid. Yes, you can. Most of the things I list here, you can get them to purchase at Agriculture Input Warehouse, but try adding organic matter such as your animal dung and so on to your soil so you can improve the soil health, right? Sulfur. Sulfur is an important plant nutrient in the production to bountiful food crops, right? Sometimes when there's a deficiency in sulfur, the leaf of the corn call. Don't confuse that with when the soil is dry and the leaf is still green, but the leaf calls in, right? That is an indication that the soil is extremely dry and the plant needs some water, right? So it would have this sort of rusting end or brown end coming with a bit of yellow, and you would see the shades of yellow there. So this is an indication that there's a deficiency in sulfur, right? So if you have this, as I say, solution again, animal manure. Animal manure, if you try to get animal manure and you add it to your soil, you can, as I said, these things has a lot of micronutrients and you can avoid things like these occurring, right? So this is another calcium deficiency. And you know, as calcium in our bodies for strong bones and teeth and so on. So the cell wall of the plant is the skeletal structure. So if you look at the outside of this is the skeletal structure. So when you have splitting in your things like pomegranate, splitting in your orange and splitting in fruits, you know it's a calcium deficiency. So you would have to try to correct that. Also, when you look at your lettuce and you end up having things like tick burn in your cauliflower, in your cabbage and your lettuce, right? That is a deficiency in calcium. So you would have to rectify your soil, right? Add some calcium to amend that deficiency. So see, now we're talking about deficiency. Let's talk about your fertilizer grade, right? Oftentimes, when you go to purchase fertilizer, you go and sell me a sack of fertilizer, they give me this fertilizer. You don't purchase your fertilizer based on what you grow, right? So you would hear folks say to me, but the carrot saying come out good enough, and I give it fertilizer. So I'd say, what fertilizer did you use? And they'll say, I don't know. The one that agriculture input warehouse sell me, or the one that was given to me by ministry. So then I would say, what is the ratio on the bag? I don't know. Then I would say, what color it is? Then they say white. I said, okay, urea. You use urea. Now, when you use urea, you only focusing on nitrogen and you're thinking about leaf growth, but you have to think that carrot is a root crop, and if because it's a root crop, you have to think about potassium. So, sorry, phosphorus. So phosphorus is for root growth. So you cannot focus on giving it nitrogen because you are giving it nitrogen at the expense of the tuber. Same thing with things like sweet potato. You give it a lot of nitrogen and you do not get a good yield in terms of tuber. So you have more leaf because maybe you are growing your sweet potato for callaloo production rather than growing your sweet potato for harvesting your sweet potato for consumption. So you have to pay close attention to the grade on the bag. So if you're growing things like lettuce and so on, yes, you can put your urea. It don't make sense you buy the other fertilizers that has like 12, 12, 17 plus 2 or 12, 13, whatever other things, or 13, 52, 13. You just buy urea and that will be good for your crop if you are using fertilizers. But if you are not, just stick to organic matter or your animal dung. You don't need to add any sort of fertilizer. But if you're buying fertilizer, pay close attention to the fertilizer grade on the bag because you have to think about fertilizer use efficiency. It makes no sense you add excessive amount of fertilizer in the soil that is not going to be of any benefit or utilized by the crop, but the excessive amount is going to be run off into waterways, causing things like eutrophication, polluting water, and so on. So you have to think, as I said, about future generation, about your environment. So you don't just go about using fertilizer and willy-nilly. And if you have a guide of how much fertilizer to use, which when you're actually doing proper crop production, you would know how much fertilizer, or focus on how much fertilizer, not go and just broadcast, because you're broadcasting both for the plant and for the weed, but you have to think about how much fertilizer would be needed by this plant from seedlings to harvest. So these are things that you have to take into consideration for your cost of production, so that your cost of production would not be extremely high and then you don't make a profit, right? Computer don't like me tonight. All right, so some natural source of plant nutrients, right? So natural source of plant nutrients, if you use things like coffee, so those coffee beans, they are high in nitrogen. You can just add them to your compost heap, or you can add them to your crops, add them into the soil, and they will be very good for your plant because they are high in nitrogen. We talked before of wood ash, right? We talk about compost, we talk about seaweed and those things as a great fertilizer. We talk about molasses. Well, we didn't talk about molasses, but molasses is a good source of iron and calcium and potassium for your crops. So what you can do is 1 tablespoon to I use a half gallon, and if I use a gallon, I put about 2 to 4 tablespoons to a gallon of water, and I add it to around the root of my crop. Also, banana peel. Banana is high in potassium, because you know, when you have a headache, the first thing to tell you, use things like banana, and that would help to ease your headache. So banana is high in potassium. So what you can do with the banana skin, you soak them in some water for at least 2 to 3 days, then you pour it off and you use that water on your plants, and then you can take the banana and add it to your compost, the banana skin, and add it to your compost heap, right? So some other natural source of plant nutrients, you have fresh cow manure, you have sheep manure. Chicken manure, I only use if I am making compost. I don't add it directly to my soil. Horse manure, I use that on a, that was utilized recently in a project that was done in Musty, because that's what they had access to, and I have seen great results from that. There is fresh rabbit droppings, and these are things that you can use. I personally love using rabbit droppings. It's high in N, nitrogen, good bit amount of potassium, as well as phosphorus, right? So I use rabbit droppings. So I'm supposed to go and pick up a bag as I'm speaking, and for my crops, right? So as I said before, organic fertilizer feeds the soil, right? So adding organic matter to the soil, it feeds the soil. And if your soil is healthy, it will actually give you a good yield. Chemical fertilizers, which are those fertilizers in the bags, they only feed the plant. They do not feed the soil, right? So pH test. pH test is very important, right? Reason why the pH test is very important, let me go to the next slide so I can show you. And because my computer restarted, I lose the slide the PowerPoint I was working on. I had turned this into color so you could understand, but I'm sure everybody can see it, right? So if you look at this chart, this pH chart, let me get the pointer. Where is the pointer? So if this is nitrogen, so we know as your soil reduces in terms of it becomes more acidic, right? Less nitrogen is available to the plant, right? Let's go down to phosphorus. Phosphorus, as your soil become more alkaline, this part narrows. As it narrows, meaning less and less is available to the plant. So when it's in this area here, you know, limited amount or no phosphorus is available to the plant. But how would you know this unless you do a pH test? So you plant and you have no idea of what the pH of your soil is like. So pH test could be done simple, right? So you can buy one of these. Everybody can see my video? You can see me? Not quite sure if that.
I'm not seeing it.
I'm not seeing only the slide.
All right, so my video.
Can the things zoom in, please, a bit?
The slide?
Yes, please. Better? Yes, thank you.
Right. So let me go back to the top slide. So I'll have to zoom back out. So this is a pH soil test strips, right? So these you can purchase, add some water in a container, add a spoonful, well, let's say 50 mLs of 60 mLs of water, right? And a teaspoonful of soil. You mix it, and then you take the strips and you dip it into the solution, and then you can able to get the reading of your soil pH, right? And that would tell you the level of your soil pH, whether it's alkaline or acidic. Now, if it's alkaline and you need to bring it down to be to balance it out, you would add things like wood ash, right? If it's acidic, you would add things like limestone, right? Because my video is not working, I can't even get to show the others. So you can also use a pH meter, right? So I have a pH meter that you use the same soil solution and you add it to, you dip it and you get your reading, which is quite accurate. I also have a soil pH monitor. This is one that you basically just stick it into the soil and just get a reading, right? So those are some things that I utilize with my students. Otherwise than that, what you can use are things like vinegar or baking soda. So you get a bowl of water, add some vinegar, right? A bowl, add some soil in it, then add some vinegar. And if it fizzes, it shows you that your soil is alkaline. Then in another bowl, you will boil some water, or you can, if you have access to distilled water, right? You add the soil, you add a bit of distilled water, then you add the baking soda. If this mixture fizzes, then you have an acidic soil. So the picture is there, and I have a step further on where you can follow and try if you don't have access to things like the pH test strips. If you are living in close proximity to my home and you would like few test strips, I can give you a few so that you can do some tests to know what is your soil pH, right? So how soil pH affect the plant? As I say, if it's too acidic, it's going to tie the nutrients into the soil. And if it ties the nutrients into the soil, it will show on the plant as having a nutritional deficiency. You could add all the fertilizer that you want. Unless you get your pH rectified, you would not have proper plant growth, right? So the activity is just basically showing how to go about testing your soil using baking soda and vinegar. So soil texture. Soil texture has an important role in nutrient management because it basically influences things like your nutrition retention. So when we talk about soil texture, we talk basically about the three relative proportion of soil. So we are talking about sand, silt, and clay. Now, if your soil is high, in clay, it would have a high retention to water. So it will hold water very high, but at the same time, it will tie nutrients into the soil. So it will not be made available to the plant as it should. Whereas if your soil is high in sand, it would have low water holding capacity and low nutrient holding capacity, right? So a mixture of sand, silt, and clay would give you a loam soil. So the soil texture is very important because based on your soil texture, it can help you determine what type of plant to plant. If I need an irrigation system, how many times do I have to turn on my irrigation system based on the type of soil? And also in terms of the temperature, because if you have a sandy soil, obviously you'll have to turn on your irrigation system or set it to come on a bit more often than if you have soil that is of a sandy clay loam, right? So the soil texture is very important. And you may wondering like, okay, so how do I go about knowing about my soil texture? There are many methods that are very simple and easy, right? So it have the feel method. Field meaning F-E-E-L, field method that you can do out in the field, right? So that is basically taking a teaspoon of soil, add it to the center of your hand, add some water, form a ball, then form a ribbon, right? If it breaks very fast, it can tell it's a high amount of sand in it, so it's clay. But if it form a long ribbon, it's an indication of that it's a clay soil, right? So in the next slide, I have how you go about doing a soil texture. So here you can, as I said, when you get a PowerPoint, you can follow these step by step. Now that's one of the way I go about doing it. The other way that I go about testing for soil texture is by taking a soil sample. Let's say I use 30 mLs or 50 mLs of soil. I add it to a graduated cylinder, right? So when I'm taking a soil sample, I take it in either a Z form, a W form, but different areas in the plot, in the area. Then I put it in a bucket, mix together, take a portion, put it in a bag, label it, and then I pack it away for whenever I'm going to take my soil, do my soil test. So I put it away in a plastic box. So in case, depending on the soil test I'm going to do, it will also retain moisture, right? So I take a soil sample and let's say 60 or 50 ml, I place it in a graduated cylinder, right? Then I add water above that. So I might add 200 ml of water or 150 mLs of water. And I would shake it, immerse it up and down, right? Then I leave it to settle. When I leave it to settle, I will take the total volume of soil and I'll record it. So sometimes when you add water to the soil, it increases a bit. So instead of having 60 ml, I might have 65 ml. So I record that 65 ml of soil, right? Then I want Stokes' law of sedimentation is that the largest particle falls to the bottom first, right? So I want to increase the sedimentation in terms of it settling out rather than me having to wait till the next day. So what I normally use is some alum, right? Some alum crystals, and it will help it to settle out fast. Then I can look at it now and measure the percentage of clay, sand, and silt in it. So the sand would be the largest particle, so it would be at the bottom. So I would look at it and see how much sand. So if I have like 20 mLs or 20 or so sand, so it'd be 20 over the total volume multiplied by 100, and I will get the percentage of sand. From that now, I can go on my textural triangle and plot each of these three soil particles, and then I'll be able to know what soil type do I have, right? So I'll send this for you all in a separate step by step. So if you have access to a graduated cylinder, you can do this test at home and you will be able to determine what type of soil, what is the texture of your soil, right? So this one is the field methods where you created the ribbon and then you can measure it, and based on that you can tell what type soil, texture soil that you have, right? So soil conservation. So when we talk about soil conservation, we talk about ways and means of preventing things like soil degradation, soil erosion, and also to increase the soil living ecosystem. So this means things like returning organic matter to the soil and so on, preventing surface runoff, right? Managing surface runoff, protecting the bare exposed soil, right? Especially those on sloping lands and so on. So these things are important. So what we're going to touch a bit on is like contour farming, no-till farming, and so on for soil conservation, some soil conservation practices, right? So some benefit of soil conservation practices: it boosts out quality and productivity. It maintains a natural environment for earth-dwelling organisms, which in turn increase fertility, right? And it reduces the need for things like chemical fertilizer, right? It mitigates soil erosion, right? So soil conservation method reduces erosion and depletion of the land, right? It promotes water infiltration, and also it increases the storage capacity, right? So it aids in air purification and water purification, and it gives food and shelter for wildlife. So let's get into a bit of soil conservation practices. And the few that we're going to discuss tonight is cover crops, no-till farming, contour farming, mulches, windbreaks, and buffer strips. And I think everybody here is more familiar with them. So the first one I'm going to talk about is where's the pointer? Cover crops, right? So in cover crops help to prevent soil erosion. It also helps to conserve moisture, and they also attract pollinators, right? It assists with weed, as I said before, weed suppression and pest management, right? So it serves as a green mulch or source of green manure. So some example of cover crops could be things like legumes such as beans and peanuts and those sort of things. Once they cover the soil, those things are termed as cover crops. So you have the brassicas. So based on how close you plant your cabbage, that can also be a cover crops. And then you have your cucurbits, things that run and cover the ground. So your watermelon, your cucumbers, your pumpkin, these are examples of cover crops. And in the previous slide, you will see examples in pictures. The second one is no-till farming. This is basically no disturbance of the soil at all. So you can use your soil agar and just drill a hole in the area that you're going to plant, and you plant your tomatoes. So when you're doing no-till farming, that is only done for crops that are born above ground, right? So your tomatoes, your eggplants, your corn, your pigeon peas, and so on, your cucurbits. So you're just going to disturb the hole that you're planting your soil in. So you're going to reduce things like erosion, reduce things like soil compaction. You're going to increase aggregation, increase water holding capacity, right? So you're not disturbing the soil. So it will actually help to increase the soil health, right? Then you have contour planting. Everybody know about contour farming. This is basically planting across the hill, not up and down. So this is going to prevent if there's a heavy rainfall, because you're doing ridges across the hills, right? This is going to prevent any excessive amount of water from washing away the topsoil, right? So you see this in things like sweet potato production and so on, right? Then you have mulch. Mulch is generally used to save water and to basically suppress weed, right? So you also improve your soil around your plant, and it also gives your gardening a nice aesthetic. So rather than going to the garden and seeing all these weeds, mulch will help to suppress the weeds. But oftentimes, when people think that they're using mulch to suppress the weed, adding a little bit of mulch is not ideal. You have to add your mulch to a certain thickness, at least 2 to 3 inches thick, to actually enable to suppress weed. You can't go about sprinkling the mulch and saying that you're suppressing weed, because you're just going to have more weed growth, and in your mind you're going to think that mulching does not work, and so on. But you must mulch properly in order to suppress weed growth. And then you have windbreaks, very, very important in soil conservation practice. So it prevents the excessive amount of wind and excessive amount of wind from going through an area to actually have occurring of wind erosion and those sort of things. It helps to shelter your crops and those sort of things. So having a windbreak around also is a form of biosecurity measure. I remember when I went on a workshop in Dominica Republic on the farms that we visit that were cultivating bananas. Around the edge of the farm was basically neem, and that was a source of a windbreak, also a biosecurity measure for any sort of pest coming onto the farm, right? And it's only in St. Vincent when you visit people farming area, walking on with all the jewelry, armpit, everything outside. I mean, when I went on that training, you had to remove your jewelry, you couldn't wear sandals, you had to put on water boots, obviously you had to sanitize, but we do things willy-nilly here, and then when we have a pest or disease break out, we just complain that, oh, agriculture is so hard. Agriculture is not hard. Once you get the hang of it or you set up properly, it can be easy breezy, right? And the last one is buffer strips. So these are trees planted at the bank or the bottom of a sloping hill. So I have some land in Simon or New Prospect. So it's a sloping area. So at the bottom of the land, what I did is install some coconut trees because it creates a mat and it prevents any sort of excessive amount of soil or soil from going into the river right below. So that is what you basically call a buffer strip to prevent excessive amount or erosion of soil into the water causing problems, right? So you could use things like coconut trees, you can use things like vetiver grass, right? So these are some things that you can do to prevent or to ensure that the aquatic life is not being disturbed. So in the next slide, you will see some example. So these are some example of cover crops. You have beans and sweet potato. You have no-till farming, especially in dry season. You try not to disturb the soil to reduce water holding capacity. So you just dig the hole where you're going to plant. And also in soil that is of a heavy clay content. So you just dig where you're going to plant your crops, right? You stop disturbing the soil, right? So this is an example of soil and agar that you basically use. So this was a few years ago where I got the students to utilize this. So basically I attach it to a hand drill and I basically dig the holes of where I was going to basically plant the crops, right? So this is contour planting across the hillside, right, and not down. So this is prevent any sort of soil erosion and prevent the topsoil from being washed away. And we'll take a 5 minutes break. I need it so I can get myself some water. So Latoya, could you time for 5 minutes, please?
Will do.
In this 5 minutes, we can also take some questions. I'm not quite sure why my camera is not coming on. So I hope it comes on for next session.
Miss Edwards, I heard you talking about you don't really like using poultry droppings as for manure. Prefer the sheep and goat and rabbit. I use poultry.
Sorry.
You hearing me?
I hearing you know. I had went into the kitchen. Could you repeat?
Yeah, I was asking about the poultry manure. Okay, I use a bit of poultry manure, but I don't actually just put it into the soil just like that. I allow it to break down before. So what I do when I collect my poultry manure, actually my poultry manure is actually either mixed with sawdust or something. And then I would leave it to break down for a couple of weeks before I actually use it in the soil, but not around the crops itself. So if the soil is being prepared, I would put it into the soil. Like for example, if I'm planting corn and peas in an area, my corn will finish and the peas will still be in. So then I have all the leaves from the peas that will drop there. So before the next season, I will add the manure and mix it into the soil. Let it go into the soil. Have enough time if rain come or whatever it is.
All right. So one of the reasons why I don't use chicken manure, it's a hot manure. So I can't use it and plant at the same time because it will burn my crops.
Yes, I know that.
Right. So I don't have that sort of patience. So what I normally do is use it to create a compost, right? And I'll put it between the layer of my compost. It will speed up my composting process faster. Also, in terms of using sawdust, you have to be very careful, right? Although sawdust, when it's decomposed, it's perfect. But if you add sawdust to your soil before it actually is decomposed, it will suck all the nutrients out of your soil before it start adding it back. So you have to be very careful. So when you're adding sawdust to your soil, try to use it in the form of a compost.
Oh, I don't add it by itself like that.
Okay.
Because when I have I do the poultry. So
Okay.
if I to keep the area dry, if the floor is not wire, I would put the sawdust there so to avoid
I know that
excess of moisture, right?
Right.
So then if I don't put it back into the soil directly,
right. So you
I
can
would leave it to break down here.
Right. So you're doing composting before adding, which is perfect. Yes. Create a compost and then add.
Thank you.
All right.
Good night, everyone. Good night, Mishka.
Good night.
I was wondering, why do you necessarily have to remove your jewelry before going onto the farm?
Well, some folks say that it may have it's a host for germs and what's not and microorganisms, so they ask you to remove all these things for entering the farm. Also for your own safety as well, because sometimes you can actually hook up if you have a bracelet and those sort of things, and you don't want to damage the people and plants, also damage yourself. So it's a way of being safe.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, good night. Question. When we using cow dung as a fertilizer, should we just put the wet cow dung onto the plant, or should we wait until it dries?
Oh no, you can put it the cow dung onto on the soil, not on the plants, but on the soil, because it's a cold manure, it won't burn your crop. But as I said, I don't like using cow dung because it comes with a lot of weed seeds. So once you use that, prepare to weed a lot. Yeah.
And sheep dung, you can just add it directly to the soil?
Right away. Add it to the soil and plant same time. All these are cold manure. So rabbit, sheep, goat, cow, these are cold manure. You can plant at the same time.
Okay, 5 minutes.
All right, so 5 minutes up?
Yes, it is.
All right, so we continue and we're going to talk about mulching. So what is mulching? It's basically the process of covering the open surface of the ground with some sort of external material, and this is called mulching, right? And you can use many different things as a mulch. It can be agri-fabric, it can be grass clippings, it can be banana leaves, coconut leaves, newspaper, cardboard, and so on. So in the first picture, that's a couple years ago, like many years ago, about back in 2007 when I started teaching at the college. These were practical, used to be done over at Teachers College side. So we used to get all the grass clippings from Teachers College yard, and we used to mulch our crops. So we used to mulch a crop with grass clippings. The third picture, which is the last one, is in my yard a couple years ago when I had just started my pineapple production. So I use agri-fabric and I basically cover the ground. So you can choose what you want to use to be your mulch, whether it's going to be organic or inorganic, right? So organic mulch, things like, look, we have here cardboard, straw, newspaper, wood chippings, those sort of things we would use as organic mulch. Banana leaf, lawn clippings, tree leaves, those sort of things are some example of organic mulch. So it will rot while actually help to suppress your weed and maintain soil moisture, right? So you can also use things like bamboo leaves. This is corn with banana leaves as mulch. So these are some examples of what you can use as mulch. There's also
can I ask a quick question, please?
Yes, please.
As I am using container, this applies to me too?
Right.
Containers.
Because in container, depends on what you're planting. Unless your crop is like a cabbage and it's covering the entire container, you're still gonna have weeds, right? And you also want to suppress the weeds and you want to conserve moisture. So you can use wood chips, or you can use grass clippings. Right? What is it that you're planting in a container, and what type of container do you have?
The blue barrels.
Right. And do you have weed growth? High amount of weed growth?
No, I don't have any now, but I'm just asking in the event.
Yes, you can use grass chippings and wood chips. Right? All right. So inorganic mulch consists of synthetic material. As we know, the plastic mulch, that is very popular. We have the landscape fabric or agri fabrics. You can use things such as stone, rocks. All these are things that you can use as mulch, right? They're generally used because these materials do not decompose very easily and only break down over after extended period of years. Such the replacement cost is basically reduced. So I rather use the agri fabric. This is my picture here. The third picture belongs to me. It's breathable. If rain comes, the water will still filter through the agri fabric, and it is durable. It will last a long period of time, right? Most people is accustomed to the plastic mulch. It's also a bit more affordable than the agri fabric. So when we talk about the plastic mulch, there are many different colors. There's a red, there's a white, and there are black. So from research, I've read that the red tend to have higher yields, right? The red, because of the color, it attracts certain insects. And when insects are around your plant, obviously it will have pollination, so you will have higher yield, right? The white plastic mulch is also a cooling effect. White basically repels heat, especially if you have a poultry pen and so on. And poultry are easily affected by heat stress. One of the things that you can do besides burying the pipes where you get your water from, you can paint the roof of your poultry housing in white. So that would reflect heat and reduce the amount of heat intensity on the pen, resulting in lowering heat stress, right? And you have the black. So we are more familiar with the black and the white. I've only seen the red at 2 or 3 individual here, right? So windbreaks are basically, as we said before, help to reduce soil erosion. It increases crop yield. It protects your livestock, and it creates a microclimate. And all these are just the components of soil conservation practice. And the last one, buffer strips. And I will explain the buffer strips, where at the foot of my land I put coconut trees because of the type of root structure that is like a mat, and it actually ties your soil together. You can also use things like vetiver grass and those sort of things to prevent soil erosion. All right. So water harvesting. What is water harvesting? This is basically the collection and the storage of rain water rather than allowing it to run off. Rainwater is collected from the roof and redirected into the tank. Harvesting rainwater allows for collection of a large amount of water, which basically mitigates the effect of drought. So you will have it stored for a long period of time, so you can basically use in your crops, right? And it's oftentimes the most suitable for irrigation purposes, right? So, rainwater harvesting. In the first picture here, you collect it from the roof and you can store it in your drums. And Joylyn would be very knowledgeable on this, because on their farm, they practice a large amount of rainwater harvesting. You can actually connect your irrigation system to tanks and just run it straight to your crops, right? So if you are going to set up an irrigation system, there are some things that you must ask yourself before selecting the type of irrigation that you would want to establish on your farm or in your little backyard garden, whatever the case may be. You need to know where your source of water is coming from, because a source of water could determine if you are going to use drip irrigation or sprinkler irrigation, right? I prefer to use drip irrigation because it takes your water right to the source, to the root of the plant. So in the effect that you have some water that might be a bit contaminated or not as clean as you would like it to be, it's only taken it to the root of the plant, so it's not going to go on the leaf of your plant and so on, causing any sort of disease and so on, right? So the source of your water is important, meaning the water quality, the distance in where your water is coming from, right? The purpose of your irrigation. All these things are very important. Next thing that you need to know is your type of soil. This would affect your infiltration rate. Now, if your type of soil is clay, you will have to know that irrigation system is not going to turn on as often as a soil that is high in sand, right? So you will have to turn it on occasionally in order to prevent things like waterlog and root rot, right? The topography of your soil is very important. Your land is very important. Now, if you have a sloping land, it would not be ideal to invest or install a sprinkler irrigation, because with the wind blow, so will the water go. So it will never reach the plant. So the type of irrigation system that would be ideal for there would be a drip irrigation system. Also, you need to know the productivity of the land. If the land is not productive in terms of you have poor soil quality and it's rocky, you might not be able to get proper yield from the. Do not think adding water will make a huge difference, right? So you need to know the productivity of the land in terms of your return before you go and add or install an irrigation system. A cation exchange capacity, very, very important, because the cation exchange capacity is basically an indicator of the soil fertility, because it shows the ability of the soil to basically supply or exchange the nutrients needed by plants to grow. Things such as calcium, your magnesium, your potassium, right? If the cation exchange capacity is somewhat lower, the nutrients are tied into the soil, and the nutrients could be tied into the soil because of soil salinity, in terms of your soil is high in salt or sodium, so it ties the nutrients into the soil. So all these things you must be able to know before you go and add our irrigation system, right? You must also know your water holding capacity. Your water holding capacity goes back to, again, how often you have to turn on this irrigation system, because if you have low water holding capacity, obviously you will have to turn on that irrigation system a bit more often than a soil that have a high water holding capacity. And we also talked already about the salinity level, your proposed crops. Your proposed crop is very important in terms of selecting the type of irrigation system. And lastly, your drainage rate, right? Your drainage rate is very important, because if you are going to turn on this irrigation system, let's say every 3 hours or every 6 hours, and you have poor drainage, you are going to have root rot, so then your crops is going to fail. So all these things are very, very important in determining what you're determining before you choose an irrigation or set up an irrigation system. All right, so if you want to know about your drainage or your water holding capacity of the soil, you can do a simple test to know how well my soil is draining. So what you basically do, you dig a hole, 12 inches deep, square, right? Hole, right? You fill it with water, you leave it to drain out, right? Then you fill it again with water. This time you're going to stick a ruler inside and measure how deep the water is when it actually basically starts filtering through the soil, right? So after 15 minutes, you're going to check how deep it is again, and then you're going to multiply this by 4. So you're going to check how low the water dropped, and then you're going to multiply it by 4, right, to get how fast water will infiltrate or go through that soil within 1 hour, right? If it's about 1 to 6 inches per hour, you know you have a well-drained soil, right? But if it's in less than 1 inch per hour, you know you have a soil that is considered wet, right? It has it's clay, it is high in clay content and so on, right? So you will have to be careful about continuously adding water to that soil. What you can think about doing is amending that soil by adding organic matter, so it can help to create airspace, aggregation, create structure into the soil to help for water to infiltrate through that soil, right? So these are some pictures of a simple irrigation system. As I said, when I was doing my yard, I set my own irrigation system up. All I basically do, by my blank tubes, by my emitters, and this is my backyard. I basically run them, and at the pipe, I actually have like a pressure regulator to basically prevent heavy amount of water from going through my irrigation line. So it slows down and it basically drips through my line. At my emitters, I have 1 gallon emitters. So I know when I turn on my pipe for 1 hour, each plant will get 1 gallon of water, and then I turn it back off after. So the other 2 pictures are basically irrigation system at the college. A simple irrigation system is easy to set up. It's just having the access to what you need and basically doing it yourself. So what you need is a blank distribution line, 1/2 inch, right? So you can get these on Amazon. I'm not quite sure if they're selling them locally right now, but normally I purchase from Amazon. You can get up to 500 feet. 500 feet. It's a large roll, and then you have your emitters, right? So you would place your emitters where you want your plants to be, and that's basically it. So you have a pressure regulator and a filter. You basically put it, attach this to the pipe. This part at the bottom is going to the pipe. This is what you're going to unscrew off, attach the blank distribution tubing, screw it back on, and then you have it attached to your irrigation system. Very simple, right? Very, very simple. It's not hard to basically do, right? So irrigation scheduling. So you have your irrigation system up and running. You have to think about irrigation scheduling, because what you're trying to do also is to conserve water. You do not want to use excessive amount of water that is not needed, and you're going to have a whole set of water settling there. You're going to have water logging and those sort of things. So irrigation scheduling is predicting when to irrigate, how much water is required, and depends on the water available and the crop needs, right? So obviously you must know your type of crop in terms of what water demand it requires, right? So knowing your type of crops and the demand for water is very important. We talked about this before. The type of soil is very important in determining the water holding capacity of that soil. So as I said, if you have a sandy soil, the water holding capacity is low, so you have to irrigate a bit more often. If it's a clay soil, the water holding capacity is high, so you irrigate less. So the type of soil is very important. The crop root depth is very important to know, so you will know about the water use efficiency, and so you would not waste water. And this will also not lead to any sort of crop stress. The topography will help to determine the layout of the irrigation system, and also not only the layout, but the type of irrigation system. Because I mentioned before, if you have a sloping land, misters and sprinkler irrigation system is not ideal for that, because the wind will blow away all the water and it will never make it to the crop, right? The history of the area of the land is very important, right? Water source indicates water availability and water quality. That means the source of where you're getting your water from. Knowing your weather data is important to know in terms of temperature at a certain time of the day, but also you have the modern, not irrigation system, but modern timers that you attach to the irrigation system that can be attached to your phone, and it can tell you what temperature it is, when to turn on, and those sort of things, right? So you must know the weather data, because if you have rainfall and you have your plants outside, it makes no sense to turn on that irrigation system, especially if you had rainfall for the day, right? Scheduling is as important as it aids in water conservation. It reduces the risk of over irrigation, as well as under irrigation that will occur and allow your crops to be wilted. So these are some examples of timers. These are the regular ones, right? So you basically you attach it to your irrigation system, and you set it up in terms of, you set the time and how long you want it to come on for and how often, right? So you can do this here. These now are the modern ones that are attached to your phone. It will tell you the temperature. It will tell you if the temperature in the greenhouse or the air is too hot, and you should send an indication whether should it turn on those sort of things. Will tell you how long the irrigation system runs for, those sort of things, right? So these are the regular one, and the one for the youths, the one to encourage youths into agriculture, because you can do all these things from the comfort of your phone, right? And whoa, that's a wrap on tonight. So next session, we will talk about pre-harvest. I don't think it's right. We'll talk about pre-harvest factors affecting fruit and vegetable quality, and we'll talk about things like the genetic factor in terms of the variety that is chosen, the mineral nutrition in terms of the nutrition that is given to the crop in terms of for growth, where you will learn things like excessive amount of nitrogen could reduce the quality of a fruit, right? We will talk about the planting density, where planting too much or having a plant and not pruning it can actually lead to disease, such as fungal disease, things like anthracnose and so on. We'll talk about environment and how the environment and climatic factors could affect the fruit and vegetable quality. We'll talk about the benefits of pruning and thinning in terms of pruning the lower parts of your tomato plant so you can focus on getting large tomato, also removing all the side shoots so you can maintain focus on the main shoot, the main vine, right? We'll talk about irrigation system, the use of organic material, harvesting at the correct maturity index, and how that could affect quality of your shelf life of your vegetables and fruit, and also in terms of type of harvesting and how you go about harvesting, not pulling from the tree but actually using a secateurs to remove the fruit from the tree. It might be a little bit more tedious, but you can have a plant lasting for a longer time than a shorter time because you damage it by just pulling plants from fruits from the tree. And that's a wrap on my session tonight.